Tony? Thank you.
Let me take a few minutes just to record how we've gotten where we are, because a lot of this will be relevant to where we're going. When I first started getting involved in this case, I used to say that we were fighting a freeway, a line that was drawn when the Dodgers were still playing at Ebbets Field. Actually, in 1959, which I think was 2 years when they came to Dodger Stadium, this Route 7 was designated along essentially what we've known as the Meridian Route. 1964 was the year that the California Transportation Commission, pursuant to state law, officially adopted the Route 710. And that is basically the decision that this city and its allies had to contest for the subsequent 4 decades. However, after that designation and after some construction started on the freeway and houses were purchased in the freeway corridor, 2 events took place, one in 1969 and one in 1970. In 1969, Congress adopted or enacted the National Environmental Policy Act, and in 1970, California followed suit with the California Environmental Quality Act. In signing NEPA on January 1st, 1970, President Nixon predicted it would be the environmental decade, and he was really right about that one. Because as soon as the freeway construction looked like it was getting underway, South Pasadena, Sierra Club, and several other organizations filed an action in the Federal District Court represented by the Center for Law and the Public Interest. Some of the lawyers on that case are just very famous people in California in subsequent years, among them Mary Nichols, who now has chaired our Air Resources Board twice during several Brown administrations. And an injunction was quickly negotiated because the thrust of these cases was that you can't build this freeway without doing an environmental impact statement and an environmental impact report. And so in January of 1973, Judge Crary signed an injunction that essentially is in a variant form still in effect today that prevents the freeway construction. Over the next 25 years, Caltrans and the Federal Highway Administration tried to agree on a freeway project. Caltrans proposed the Meridian Route. Then, when Jerry Brown was elected governor, early in his administration, that was abandoned in favor of just connecting the 110 freeway into the 210 and calling that the project. The federal government refused to accept that. It was back to the drawing board after Jerry Brown left office. They went through 2 iterations, again, of environmental impact reports. Worth remembering that it took 4 versions of draft environmental impact reports before they could produce a final environmental impact report and study on which both Caltrans and the Federal Highway Administration could agree. And of course, the heroes of that fight were the historic preservation community led by Ray Gervigian in this town, by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the Preservation Foundation, and Pasadena Heritage. I'll have a little bit more to say about that partnership. And so finally, on April 13th, 1998, because I was there in his office at the Department of Transportation when Secretary Slater signed the record of decision. It took them 25 years from the proposal of the route to get to that point. The city and others filed an amended complaint, eventually had to bring a new action in front of Judge Dean Pragerson, whose father, Harry Pragerson, had presided and continues to preside over the Century Freeway case, challenging the approvals on grounds of violating the National Environmental Policy Act, the National Historic Preservation Act and the Clean Air Act. And 1 year later, based on those claims, I think maybe I have to, I'm not too good at this stuff. We'll come to that slide in a minute, sorry. We have some administrators at Bolt Hall who say you should use more PowerPoint, and my answer is that of the Marine General who criticized the PowerPoint Rangers in the Pentagon, that you don't argue to the Supreme Court in PowerPoint. So far we've managed to make it that way. Anyway, Judge Pragerson issued this injunction in 1999, which was merely a preliminary injunction that just said, you can't build the freeway while we're going to try this claim on the merits, but it was a rather thorough opinion. And in fact, so convincing was the opinion that in the year 2003, in December, the Federal Highway Administration decided that, in fact, if this project was going to go forward again, all of the deficiencies cited by Judge Pragerson had to be cured, and in addition, Caltrans would have to show that the project had financial feasibility. And the state, a few months later, also withdrew its approval. So at present, there is no record of decision, there is no state approval. We're on a blank slate insofar as approvals on any highway construction in this corridor. Then two more significant landmarks recently. As part of the campaign to build the freeway going back into the late 1970s and early 1980s, a former legislator and congressman from the Alhambra area succeeded in passing a state law that took away South Pasadena's right to insist on a freeway agreement as a condition of freeway construction. To its great credit, in the year 2011, the legislature repealed that bill to where now every city in the state, including all of the corridor cities, not just South Pasadena, but also Los Angeles and Pasadena, have the right to veto a proposed freeway through their communities under the so-called freeway agreement litigation. And let me emphasize that while the legislation speaks in terms of street closures, Caltrans has historically taken the position that what that really means is that a freeway will not be built through a community without their consent. And then the cream on the cake really came 2 years ago, year and a half ago, when, with the support of the Brown administration, the legislature passed a bill, one of whose provisions declared that the surface freeway was henceforth to be removed from further consideration in any environmental documentation prepared by the state of California. And so the legislature really did for us what we were out for throughout this litigation, which was to permanently kill the 710 surface route. So in concluding the history, there is a little personal history here. Some of you may remember that part of the partnership between the National Trust and the city was that one of the first people I met in this fight was my future wife, Kathy Burns. And so when our daughters were, I think, about a year and a half old, we came down for one of the last freeway rallies. I just want to assure you that they have, as kids are wont to do, continued to grow larger, and they will graduate from high school next month. So they'll be ready to take on the next generation. And then finally, these are some of the things that have happened. I think you'll hear more about the significance of these from the subsequent speakers. But it's quite ironic that early in this fight, we kind of said half in jest, if it means that much to them, they should just build a tunnel under South Pasadena. We never thought anyone would be so crazy as to pick up on that idea. But they did. And in 2006, Metro kind of took charge and released a technical feasibility assessment report, whose intellectual and scientific foundations are questionable at best, kept the project moving along. In 2008, Measure R was passed that set aside $780 million for future use in the so-called 710 corridor. And then the final pre-EIR contributions, if you will, from Metro was the release of their alternatives analysis. That report dismissed a surface road as infeasible, although it was described in that report. This frosting on the cake was when the legislature blessed that conclusion and said that Alternative 6 would henceforth be removed from further consideration. And so, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, that's where we are today.
Thank you, Tony. You are truly a legend. Mr. Gold.
Let's see. Hello, everyone, City Council, Mr. Mayor. My name is Avram Gold, and I'm here to talk about that. One or two 60-foot diameter tunnels that will run under that. Our homes, businesses, churches, schools, and stores in Pasadena, South Pass, and El Sereno. And under all of that, we have this. 7 different rock and soil densities, along with 5 active faults. This is where the tunnels are supposed to go through multiple geological challenges. And when you have multiple geological challenges, you have multiple geological challenges for this. A tunnel boring machine, or a TBM for short. A TBM breaks up rocks and soil and carries it away, and while it's doing that, it's building a concrete shield behind it and forms the tunnel. For many years, 30-foot diameter TBMs have been constructing rail tunnels. But since 2003, when Paris built the A86 road tunnel, TBMs kept increasing in size past 38 feet, all the way to 50 feet, which became the largest diameter TBM to finish a tunnel without a serious breakdown. Because in 2011, the Sparvo tunnel in Italy had a 51-foot diameter, and that dirt digger stalled for 2 months. Then in December of 2013, Bertha, the largest TBM in the world with a 57.5-foot diameter, overheated and stopped just 342 yards from the launch pit in Seattle, Washington. And here we have Bertha at the launch pit with its giant cutting head yet to be attached. That's 5 stories high. And here's Bertha again, this time with its giant cutting head connected and grubby from that 342-yard excavation. This photo angle points down into the crater where Bertha ended up. Why is Bertha in a big hole instead of merrily drilling away under buildings? Well, as I said, it stopped. And it stopped because muddy, gritty crud that was supposed to stay outside the TBM seeped inside the TBM and sludged around this. That's Bertha's big, giant main bearing. Okay, let's see, where am I? All right, now the tunnel boring machines break down. They break down a lot. And here's a table I put together, which is absolutely impossible to read, and I don't expect you to try it. I brought a number of copies that you can look at and take home. That'll be at the table after my talk and after this meeting. Anyway, this listing describes many things that have gone right but also wrong in the tunnel fabrication business. Over half of the tunnel projects in the world have faced unexpected calamities, which of course cost a lot of extra money and time. When you're chewing away underground, you really don't know everything that's down there, waiting to gum up your machine or break your cutting discs made of super hard steel. Those black, round, double-edged things, those are the cutting discs, and they have to be changed when they wear out. Now, when things go wrong and a tunnel boring machine stalls and needs repair, there are 3 ways to get it going again. You can fix the cutting boring parts underground by digging out a bigger cave around the TBM and push to that cave by carving yet another tunnel. Or if it's just small parts that need changing, you can do it from behind the cutting head inside the TBM. Or you can do a mega fix like Seattle, where getting to Bertha is a very big deal. Like scooping out a super big hole, 80 feet in diameter and 120 feet deep. Okay, you can see there, they've dug the ditch. Now what are they going to do? Well, they're going to take apart that giant rock and dirt eater and rebuild the cutting head and motor assembly in the sunlight where there's room to move around. Just like this. So why am I telling you a Seattle story when we live in Pasadena, South Pass, and Los Angeles? I'm telling you about Bertha's big hiccup because this mammoth rescue operation, that one, could happen here. In South Pasadena, right under the Gold Line, and turn Mission Street stores and apartments into a construction site that looks like this. Or it could turn this place, Huntington Hospital across the street from Markham Place Historic District, into this. Okay, granted, an above-ground salvage is a worst-case scenario. Maybe the broken TBM can be fixed underground by digging a bigger tunnel around it. Well, the bigger cave that you build close to water, as in this water, these water tables, when you're close to aquifers, there's a good chance that water will find you in your tunnel and you don't want to be found there. And yes, you get flooded. A flooded tunnel drowns TBMs. So you try to outsmart physics. You pump the water out of the way near your big underground hole and beloved TBM. However, when you pump too much water out of the ground, the earth gets less dense and firm, and then this happens. Sinkholes. And guess what? In Seattle, when those very smart engineers pumped the water away from that very big hole to get down to their very big TBM, the ground nearby dropped 1.25 inches and moved some very big buildings and water pipes into places they didn't want to go. Now, you people are very nice, and I don't want to scare you. I'm not trying to say that if the tunnels get started, all that bad stuff will happen. What I'm saying is it can happen. And unfortunately for us, Caltrans and Metro are saying it won't happen. And that's why there is no mention of tunneling failures or TBM breakdowns in the draft environmental impact report, yet. These quotes from that same report tell another story. The preliminary design concepts described herein are limited to the geotechnical information available to date. Concepts are expected to be modified and refined as additional geotechnical information becomes available. And Appendix C states, further study as to the type of TBM to be used for each of the alignments will be evaluated in future phases of this study. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, aren't we supposed to be getting all this information now so that you and me and our friends at Caltrans can decide together if we want the tunnels or not? And if we, the public, are supposed to be alerted to all the significant environmental impacts that could happen, well, golly gee, we're not getting that information. We're getting just enough to assure us that everything will go as planned. Nothing to worry about, folks. Well, here's a recap of things we need to worry about. There's still not enough geological tests for tunneling and too many underground unknowns. The SR710 TBMs must bore through 5 active faults and below 2 depleted water tables. Dewatering may create settlement issues, sinkholes, and groundwater contamination. Caltrans and Metro don't know what kind of TBM design they'll need because type and function is based on a complete geological survey, which has yet to happen. And most importantly, the TBMs will be the largest and the heaviest in the world and designed with untested technology. No TBM larger than a 50-foot diameter has worked without a significant breakdown, and ours would be 60. So there you have it, some things to think about. And here's something else. If the tunnels go forward, no matter what happens, no matter how much they go over budget or their schedules are stretched, they will get finished. Every highway project of this magnitude eventually gets finished. But at what cost? What will we get out of it? And what will we be giving up? Let's not leave these questions unanswered. There's too much at stake. Thank you for your time and interest.
Thank you, Mr. Gold. Do we have comments from City Council? Michael? Or question?
One of your last comments with regard to the cost of the project, so these tunnel boring equipment and the entire cost. I know in ours, the predicted cost or proposed of the 6-mile tunnel was $5.6 billion. For I think it was 4 on top, 4 on the bottom. Lanes in each direction or two side-by-side tunnels. I know when I went to visit Boston several years ago a couple times, I know they started at an estimate of $2.8 billion in late 80s, early 90s, and today it's gone over $15 billion.
And still facing lawsuits.
And still facing lawsuits and, things falling on people's cars. What's the track record of a lot of these projects? Again, estimated cost, as the engineers say, estimated cost is $5.6 billion, Boston was 2.8.
From the research I've seen of tunnel projects around the world, maybe a third or 40% go way over budget. Some go a little bit over budget. Some come in under budget. Generally, there are contingency factors put into the budget, and I believe Caltrans and Metro, from what I read, are putting a 35% contingency budget in, plus another 4% for right-of-way issues. Because if there are problems, and they do have to do an above-ground fix, they're going to have to take homes and businesses away through public domain. And there may be lawsuits there, and they're going to have to buy the properties. And none of that is mentioned anywhere in the draft EIR. Now, the machines themselves are the most expensive things you can imagine. Bertha cost over $80 million, and that wasn't even a proper machine for the job. They should have, from what I'm looking at, they used an earth pressure balance machine. They should have used what's called a multimodal, which is a machine that both uses slurry effects for softer, more permeable materials, as well as hard, gritty stuff, which can be then pulled back through the machine on a conveyor belt. They only went for an earth pressure balance machine so that when, in fact, they did run into muddy, slushy stuff, the machine couldn't handle the material.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, Avram, excellent presentation and easily communicating what I think are very technical and difficult concepts. I'm wondering if you would agree with me that any cost information that is provided by Caltrans and Metro at this point is speculative at best, given the statement that Metro really doesn't, and Caltrans really don't have sufficient information to do a geotechnical design for the tunnel.
I think it's speculative. I think I think that this whole plan is running on assumptions. Last week I had a talk with John Lee, who's the senior project manager out of Caltrans for this. And he had not even considered what it would take to move the pieces and the parts from the ports to the sites, to the launch sites. And nobody in Metro could answer some questions to me, simply like, will the cutting head be able to be taken apart, or will it have to be shipped as a 60-foot disc? Because as a 60-foot disc, there's no way you can get it onto the freeways. And nobody could answer that question. So I agree with you. I don't think they've thought this out, really. I don't know where they're coming up with their money.
Is there any other comments? Oh, Delane.
I was just wondering, have you seen anything in the document yet referring to any possibility of methane gas?
To be honest with you, I didn't look at that part of the draft. I was just looking at water issues
Is,
and geological, a little bit about geological issues, but mostly about potential breakdowns.
okay.
Thank you, Mr. Goh. Appreciate it. The next topic will be draft EIR, EIS, key findings, and multimodal vision from Jeff Tumlin from Nelson Nygaard Consulting. Jeff has been working on the 5-City Alliance, which includes the cities of Glendale, Pasadena, La Cañada, Flint Ridge, Sierra Madre, and South Pasadena, to analyze the deficiencies of the draft EIR, EIS. In addition, Jeff has been working with the connected cities and communities to develop a multimodal vision for the region. Hi, Jeff.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So once again, my name is Jeff Tumlin. I'm with Nelson Nygaard. We're about a 130-person transportation planning and engineering firm focused on comprehensive mobility solutions. And as the mayor mentioned, the 5 Cities Alliance hired us to look in depth at the draft environmental document and particularly the transportation technical report. We were also asked to look in detail at the model results from Metro, but those still have not been delivered to us, despite the fact that we were sure that we would get them. We also looked at a variety of other related transportation planning documents here in Southern California in order to compare these documents against one another. One of the first things to understand in this environmental document is that first and foremost, it's an environmental document. And one of the things that is very clear from the analysis is that building the tunnel, really any of the tunnel alternatives, results in a significant increase in driving. In fact, the environmental document says that daily vehicle miles traveled will increase by about 100,000 to 500,000 miles per day. Additional driving above and beyond what would occur under the no-build scenario. This is an extraordinary amount of additional driving. This is the result of a model analysis that came out of the same model that predicted that widening the 405 through Sepulveda Pass would actually result in improved travel time savings for people who drive on the 405. And I think, as you all know, that project opened with worse driving times than motorists experienced before $1 billion was spent widening that freeway. So this same model says there will be a huge increase in what we call induced demand, additional driving of up to 500,000 additional miles per day. All of this means that this per capita increase in vehicle miles traveled is going completely contrary to all of the environmental direction that the state has established. It violates Assembly Bill 32, which is requiring that we reduce our CO2 emissions, in part by reducing vehicle miles traveled. It's a violation of Caltrans's own strategic plan, which requires that the state reduce its per capita vehicle miles traveled by 15%. And it violates the Southern California Association of Governments Regional Transportation Plan and Sustainable Communities Plan, which sets a goal of a 10.8% reduction in per capita vehicle miles traveled. So while inducing all of this additional driving, it also creates very questionable benefits. So according to the environmental document, only about 14% of the traffic in the study area is what they call regional cut-through traffic. And from what we can tell, they're defining regional cut-through traffic as people who are driving, say, from Monterey Park to South Pasadena, not just trucks, wanting to come through from the port to the San Fernando Valley. So about 14% of the traffic during the peak period on arterial streets is going more than just from one city to the adjacent city. The best options for the tunnel build alternative reduce that regional cut-through traffic from about 14% to between 7 and 11%. It's not eliminating this regional cut-through traffic, it's just reducing it by 7 to 3 percentage points. More importantly, The project says that after spending all of this money, only 7 to 13% of drivers in the study area will receive any travel time benefit. 7 to 13% of drivers will receive a little bit of travel time benefit, and that's overwhelmingly the regional traffic that is cutting through your community. The other 87 to 93% of motorists will either see no benefit or, very interestingly, will see their travel time worsened. So for most of the actual local traffic that all of you have to deal with in your daily lives, there will be either no change or a slight worsening in traffic conditions based upon the analysis that I'll get into in a second. And that, to the extent that there is a benefit, it is largely a result of people who are not living or working in your communities. Indeed, because the project doesn't connect to your communities. And the other thing that we identify, and I'll show you the maps in just a second, is that on a regional level, while there are specific locations that do receive some travel time benefits, most notably on the 605 freeway, the result of the project is simply to move congestion around. It changes the locations of the traffic bottlenecks, and in fact, results in very significant increases in congestion on many of the freeways around here. And let me go through those in just a second. So one of the things that I think is very important to look at, if you want to go look yourself, in the Transportation Technical Report, it's figures 5-8 and 5-24, along with table 716. There are a series of maps that they produce that compare regional freeway level of service under the different scenarios. Now, what they don't do is the subtraction, comparing the build options to the no build options. So we tried to do that for you, showing the difference between the different options. And what you can see on this slide is that building the tunnel here results in some significant shifting around in traffic. The biggest impact is reducing traffic on this stretch of the 605, just south of the 210. So traffic that is currently, say, going to Arcadia by going this way could instead use the 710 and go there going that direction. But more importantly, you'll notice where the red lines are. These are places that see a significant impact in driving and a significant worsening of congestion. And of course, connecting this is resulting in a huge increase in driving on this part of the 710 and naturally on this whole part of the 210. The other thing that is most interesting to us as well is that the induced driving that this project creates doesn't even alleviate traffic on I-5. Traffic on the 5 actually gets worse as a result of the build options. Now you can imagine if you're adding traffic to the 5 and adding traffic to the 210, that where those two freeways meet, just before the Antelope Valley Freeway, there's going to be a horrible bottleneck situation created. Just to do a little bit of alleviation over here in Irwindale. Oh, and the other benefit that we found that was really interesting is the Glendale Freeway actually receives a little bit of traffic reduction. We couldn't figure out why until we realized, oh yeah, the 210 gets severely congested, so people will no longer use the Glendale Freeway to cut to the 210, avoiding traffic congestion on the 5. So these are the conditions in the AM peak. The PM peak is the patterns are slightly different, but again, you can see some benefits over here on the 605, a lot worse on the 210, a lot worse on the 710. Basically, most of the other freeways, relatively unchanged or slight increases in traffic. This is remarkably little benefit for such an expensive project. The other thing that we found that was even more fascinating, and again, you've got to really, really wade into the detail in order to understand this, because the analysis is not actually provided in a clear and upfront way, is the impacts to local streets, to arterial intersections. One of the things that we found that was interesting to us in the tables was that the traffic congestion, or at least the traffic volume, and much of the acute congestion in your study area is not a result of north-south traffic, but really east-west traffic and specific bottleneck locations that really have to do with the design of the freeway steps. So if you look at the differences in the arterial intersections, comparing the no build to the build options in the morning peak and the evening peak, you will notice that in the morning peak, there are more intersections that actually get worse than are improved. So the red dots are intersections really in each of the cities in the study area where there's a worsening of arterial intersection congestion in order to create some alleviation, again, in scattered locations around the study area. But with things getting significantly worse, particularly in Pasadena, but especially in Rosemead, and things being basically awash, even in Alhambra. In the PM peak, there's basically an equal number of intersections that are made worse compared to those that are made better. Again, why are we spending this much money to move congestion around rather than solve congestion, with the only benefit being to those people who are doing regional trips who are using the tunnel? Now, there are other problems that we found with the study, largely having to do with the way the project purpose and need is framed. So the purpose of this project asks the question, if there were a big north-south transportation project that connected one thing called the 710 to another thing called the 710, what would that project be? And while maybe that's an interesting question, the way the purpose and need is framed does nothing to help the San Gabriel Valley address its real and acute transportation needs. The transportation needs in the San Gabriel Valley are not just north-south in this one particular corridor. They're all over the place. And they're all over the place in part because of the travel patterns of the San Gabriel Valley. So east-west options were completely ignored, and accommodating the preponderance of trips in this region that are short trips are also completely ignored. So of the study area residents within the environmental document study area, 40% of them live and work within the study area. That's a very high number. In terms of commute trips, lots and lots and lots of relatively short commute trips, and over 90% of the study area residents work somewhere in Los Angeles County. Similarly, 90% of the study area employees live in LA County, and about 60% of the non-work trips, so 80% of our trips are non-work trips, 60% of those trips start and end within the study area. The bulk of the transportation need here is not regional, it's local. And this project does absolutely nothing to address that. The study also assumes a straight line increase, that as population and jobs increase in this area, that driving increases along a straight line, when in fact, the data is very clear that that's not true. You can go into Google Earth Pro, which is a program you can download for free, and look at historic traffic data for streets throughout this region and see how they've changed over time. For the most part, they've remained basically stable as this area has grown significantly in terms of jobs and population, and in many corridors, the traffic volumes have actually declined. So, all this is to say that while your region has dire transportation needs, there is no good project that can come out of this environmental document, largely because of the way that the project purpose and need statement is flawed. Yet there are so many things that we can do in order to address the real transportation needs here. And so in addition to looking at the environmental document, the 5 cities have asked us to look at the study area and to see what could be done that might be better, recognizing the fundamental flaw of this study, which is what we're calling an OCD problem. Traffic engineers have an obsessive compulsive disorder that there are 2 things called the 710 that point at each other but don't connect. And it bothers us. Surely something must be done to solve this problem, right? Regardless of the cost. No. What we need to do is to look at the data and understand the travel patterns that exist here and to develop 100 small transportation solutions to address the complexity of this place's travel demand patterns and needs. A single giant tunnel does nothing to address your local travel demand patterns. And yet, there are a lot of projects, many of which are already planned or underway that will help. So for example, the Gold Line extension that's underway. We're also looking at a variety of other transit projects that could be done affordably that actually respond to the origin destination patterns. So for example, having really high quality bus transit from North Hollywood to Burbank to Glendale through to Pasadena and into South Pasadena and Alhambra. Upgrading Metrolink, upgrading the El Monte busway, completing the Gold Line, doing bus rapid transit along Atlantic Avenue, connecting into Cal State Los Angeles and into all of the major destinations in Pasadena, but also continuing down south all the way to the Green Line station at Long Beach Boulevard. This is a sort of transit network that could actually form the backbone for a mobility system that works for this region, not just being a replacement for the freeway project. We also looked very carefully at the success of Cal State Long Beach, which has given all of its students, faculty and staff as well, free transit passes for the full region. That has had an immense impact on the travel behavior for people in that intense node of Cal State Long Beach. If we were to apply a similar program for the 84,000 students, Pasadena City College, Cal State LA, East LA College, we could get a similar traffic demand reduction at a much lower price than anything that is being considered for the capital projects. In fact, for 30 years of free transit passes for those 84,000 students, it would cost a lot. It would cost $500 million, but would provide real benefits that actually reduces the demand for all of our existing streets and highways rather than increasing demand by building more supply. We're also interested in building out the bike plans for all of the local jurisdictions. Not only doing that, but taking those bike plans to a gold level. Having the San Gabriel Valley have the highest quality bike facilities and pedestrian facilities in the United States of America. Comparing that to the cost of a giant tunnel, you could have the most walkable, bikeable communities anywhere in the United States at a small fraction of that cost. So we've been starting to do a little bit of cost numbers for all of this, building out all these transit lines, providing incredibly high quality walk and bike amenities, doing spot congestion relief at critical intersections, making a lot of the TDM, TSM solutions actually work, and doing all of this gold level transportation demand management, coming in at almost half the cost of the tunnel and creating real benefits for your community. So I would urge you to demand better from Metro and SCAG and demand a better solution that actually benefits your community. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much. Questions or comment from the council?
I have some, but I'd be willing to wait for anybody else.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Excellent presentation. You mentioned that the project does not connect to South Pasadena. Could you explain why you said that, the basis for that statement?
So the tunnel is effectively a bypass, right? So in terms of being useful for that preponderance of trips that are actually fairly short distance, it does nothing to create a direct transportation benefit for your community. What it does is reduces some of that regional traffic, some of those, that actually rather small percentage of traffic that is people that are driving through your community that don't have an origin or destination either here or among your neighbors. What we were actually a little bit surprised to find, though, is that the benefit of eliminating some of that regional traffic wasn't showing up in any of the actual traffic analysis, that as many intersections were made worse as were made better.
And then I have a related question. You discussed a model where you've made certain assumptions with respect to traffic patterns and how they would be affected by the construction of the tunnel. But I think we have very good reason to be extremely skeptical with respect to the estimated $5.6 billion cost of the tunnel, thinking that the actual cost will actually be much higher because you don't know what you don't know when it comes to underground construction. And so given a minimum 5.6, but we think actually much higher cost, there's not enough public money to construct the tunnel available, so it can only be constructed with private financing. What, if any, assumptions did you make regarding the cost of using the tunnel? That is tolls.
Right, so we were not able to make any assumptions because we're waiting for that information still from Metro. You know, we've been promised the financial modeling, the cost-benefit analysis, the cost analysis, and the modeling information, and have not gotten any of that information. So we sort of took a guess at, you know, others have used a $5.4 billion cost. You know, it may well be significantly higher than that. We have no idea.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Another quick question, please.
Yeah, Bob, maybe a question and comment. Jeff, talking about traffic patterns, and you're looking, did you look at like the maybe two fastest growing counties in California? Might just be what you were talking about, Riverside County, the fastest growing, and San Bernardino by the 10 in the top 5. And the fact that as I sit on AQMD board every month, we look at the different EIR projects for warehouse construction. And I'd say in the last year, 90 to 95% of the 1 million plus square foot warehouse projects for this goods movement from the ports is not north-south.
Okay.
It's in Ontario, Riverside, Redlands. 95% of those massive warehouse projects, which are going to move the goods across the United States, are just what you're saying, east-west, east of LA County. Would you agree with that, those
Absolutely, and the data in the environmental document absolutely supports that the larger transportation problem is really east-west, both at the regional level, but even within the study area itself. And again, one of the reasons why I don't believe it is possible to get a good project out of this document because of the way the purpose and need is defined as a north-south project between 2 points.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Michael. Next presentation will be the city's approach in working together with the region